I'd always been interested in what inspired any given anime to be created. What was going on in the world when someone made whatever anime? How did that come into play to shape the anime they made? Today we're going on a journey from 1911 to present day to survey the influences that inspired and impacted the different anime of whatever time. This will not be a comprehensive history of all Japanese animation, just a survey of various inspirations that influenced anime throughout history. Also, we'll be jumping around in the timeline a bit for better coherence. Get it? Got it? Good. There is a lot of academic dispute about what was technically the first Japanese animation, a lot of which stem from what counts as Japanese animation. Most of the first animated films were foreign imported films, so those weren't necessarily Japanese-made animation. Also, many of the first animations were sold to big companies who sold it to small theater companies, and those film reels, after they were presented, were cut and sold like today's idol merch. However, as we'll see throughout this journey, these foreign films and later cartoon shows did a lot to inspire the anime that came later. The first known animation in Japan was a short sequence made in 1907, Katsudo Shashin, or moving picture, an animation made as an experiment to find a cheap way to bring the animator's vision to life. The short was drawn directly onto film and then projected. Often in Japan, animated film moving forward was made out of desire to experiment with animation techniques. Oten Shiokawa was one of the leading cartoonists in Japanese industry and a mangaka. He was hired by the film company Tenkatsu to make solo animations for them. The most notable animation he made while with Tenkatsu was in April 1917, Imokawa Mukuzo Genkanban no Maki, or the story of the concierge Mukuzo Imokawa. The animation was made by drawing images on a black chalkboard, then redrawing images as needed, and taking pictures of each drawing to create the desired animated effect. Kitayama Seitaro created a studio where students and fellow animators were experimenting on work that combined motifs with traditional stories and folklores to make a new form of animation. But that work unfortunately was lost to the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. Between 1923 and 1939, animators had to compete with large foreign studios like Disney, who not only strongly influenced the taste of Japanese audiences, but also the expectations of producers who screened these animation proposals for showing in theaters. There was a lot of extra financial pressure this caused, as since the main source of profit of these foreign films were, foreign countries, these foreign studios were able to sell these movies to Japan at a fraction of the price that they sold in the US, making it all the more difficult for Japanese animators to compete with them. This caused Japanese animation companies to remain small and their productions low budget. They as a consequence struggled to make animation that was competitive with the works of foreign studios, which had color, sound, and promotional support of way bigger companies that Japanese animators had access to. These factors caused cutout animation to be used as a style in Japan through the mid-1930s, since the cel animation other nations used was too expensive. Legendary animators such as Yasuji Murata and Nobuo Ufuji were able to create wonderful animations using this cutout animation style. To work around the financial difficulties of the industry, many animators worked on projects for PR films who were able and willing to pay for their work. There were still animators like Yasuji Murata who were actually inspired by Western cartoons to make his own cartoon. Kobutori being one of those animations he made in 1929. Animators also made educational films for the government, which eventually rolled over into the creation of military propaganda. Since censorship and school regulations restricted students from watching cartoons, it was way easier to pitch animation that was of an educational nature to be shown to children. Murata created Taro's Train in 1929 as a result of these restrictions. It was an animation that mixed in bits of live action, a style that gets used to this day. One of the latest examples of this style was 2018's Pop Team Epic. Murata also made Oira no Yakyu in 1930, where he returned to his sports cartoons roots and created a cartoon that mixed the influence of Western funny animal cartoons with an Eastern folklore, Kachi Kachi Yama, a story about a fight between a tanuki, a raccoon, and a rabbit. Nobuto Ofuji created an animation, Haru no Uta, to teach kids about sakura cherry blossoms, the national symbol. The animation also taught kids about Japanese traditions, such as the wearing of the kimono and dances used to welcome the arrival of spring. The animation, though Japanese focused, used music that clearly had a Western focus, including Kiku Inoue's singing methodology in the animation. But for this piece, Ofuji experimented with unique shapes and textures using chiyogami, an Edo-era wood-block paper. Ofuji shot the piece on a paint baby, which was often used in the 1920s and 1930s. It was unable to record sounds, so Ofuji played a recording of Kikuo Inoue singing while simultaneously playing a Columbia Records photograph recording of the animation he made. Nobuto Ofuji created an animation that was more dark, Kokka Kimagayo, in 1931. It was made to play along with the Japanese national anthem. The animation resembled the silhouette style of German animator Lotte Lehminger, who, showing American cartoons, one of the only animations influencing Japanese creators. Taking a step back, Nobuto Ofuji's 1927 black and white film Kujira, or Whale, was a 1927 black and white silent film that aimed to tell a story that explored themes such as greed, the suffering of women, forces of nature, and transformation. This was surely one of the first Japanese animations that aimed to deliver a message about universal themes. He would create a colored version of this animation in 1952. Up until the 1930s, animations were often narrated by Benshi narrators, and they took great pride in that, so much so that they pushed for soundtracks to not be introduced in anime, as it took away from their work. Nobuto Ofuji put a perfectly fitted jazz piece into his animation, 1931's Kuro Nyago, breaking this tradition. In this animation, he took the Western classic corny sing-along ball-following lyrics animation style and put his own spin on it. Said bouncy ball interacts with the environment, with animation sequences changing these environmental elements. Western animation had been clearly influencing Eastern animation. Here we are seeing Eastern artists expand on those ideas. The animation censorship increased during World War II. Animators were pushed to make animations that promoted a sense of nationalism in Japan. The Imperial Japanese Army got animators to make work that painted Japan's Asian occupation in a good light. This led to movies such as Masao Seo's 1945 Momotaro Umi no Shinpei, or Momotaro's Divine Sea Warriors, the first full-length anime movie. It was a movie with a message of hope for peace, which moved a young Osamu Tezuka to tears. One of the first manga characters that became well known was from Sugo Tagawa's Norakuro, a 1931 manga about a stray dog that joined the Dog Army, which was an allusion to the Japanese Imperial Army. The pupper rose through the military ranks throughout the manga, turned 1935 anime. It wasn't meant to be war propaganda, but as the war began and escalated, the dog began being used as war propaganda. After World War II, however, foreign animation techniques began inspiring Japanese anime industry, including Osamu Tezuka. The 40s and 50s were when anime truly began to flourish. The 50s were when we saw actual anime studios pop up across Japan. Hiroshi Takahata bought such an animation studio that he named Japan Animated Films, which later became Toei Animation. He had the goal of making a studio the Disney of the East. Toei Animation became well known for each animator incorporating their own ideas into their animation, which of course impacted what anime they ended up producing. Isao Takahata presented the most extreme version of this style of anime creation, with his creation of the film Horus, Prince of the Sun in 1968. This film was seen as the first step anime took away from the then normal animation style and a step towards the movement called the progressive anime movement, which people like Hayao Miyazaki and Mamoru Oshii took part of. We now move on to the 1960s, when the first anime series began being released. The first direct-to-TV anime film was a film called Three Tales, or Mitsu no Hanashi, an experimental collection of short fairy tales in the form of black and white anime movie. Though it was only 30 minutes altogether, the three stories were broken up by live segments featuring the narrator of these shorts, Meiko Nakamura. The next anime, Instant History, or Otogi Manga Calendar. The anime was a series which featured a character who was unsure what happened on whatever day in history. An explanation of what happened on that day in history followed. Photographs and live film footage would be thrown in to help the character and audience experience what happened on that day of history. Both these animes seem to have the goal of presenting literature and history on the then new television media. Since Hanna-Barbera cartoons were already being shipped into the country and becoming popular, there was an understanding that children gravitated towards animated content. So it seemed they took advantage of the animation medium to present information and entertainment in a fun, educational way. Another anime, Sayuki, was made inspired by the Chinese novel Journey to the West, showing the anime influence also came from other Asian countries. Meanwhile, due to wanting to unionize, Tezuka Osamu went off and made his own animation studio, Mushi Productions, once his contract with Toei ended. The anime they made explored a wide variety of stories since then. The animators were given a lot of creative freedom back then. These anime had influences coming from Disney, such as Pinocchio inspiring Astro Boy's design, also Japanese history, such as Dororo, taking place during the Sengoku Jidai era. All of these anime, for the most part, centered around groups of characters going on some kind of adventure for the sake of self-development to protect something precious to them. Osamu Tezuka also led the creation of 3 animated movies as part of the Anime Rama trilogy. So the creation of hentai. The creation of these animation allowed for the mixing of traditional animation, United Productions of America techniques, Yoji-Kuri inspired modern design, limited animation, and still paintings into their animations. Take an example from Tezuka's older shorter films. Toward the end of the 1950s especially, see movies like Hakujaden, Japan's first colored animated film of 78 minutes, do well overseas. Anime film reels had been shipped overseas for the whole history of the medium, showed Japan that these overseas markets could be lucrative. Animations began having settings in places outside of Japan, not only to appeal to foreign markets, but Japan also wanted to move away from its strong nationalism, so animations taking place elsewhere also helped towards that goal. In 1963, Tezuka Osamu's 1952 manga Tetsuo Atomu, aka Astro Boy, had an anime produced for it. The anime style ended up influencing anime style for decades to come. Hachiman, or 8-man, had a similar story about a human soul being transferred into a cyborg body. It's theorized that both these anime were product of a time in Japan history where the future felt so uncertain, with World War II having just ended, and they were trying to grapple with the technological boom that was occurring at the time, along with the ramification of these technological advancements. Gundam in particular were designed using real robots as inspiration for their realistic design, aiming to be as scientifically aligned as possible. This fascination with robots and technology advancement would eventually evolve into the mecha genre. There were also anime like Speed Racer, made to, quote, please a growing fan base worldwide with exciting stories that involve facing adversity on the racetrack and beyond, unquote. So it's clear that Japan by this time was well aware and celebrating anime's worldwide renown. The 70s saw a shrink of the industry. similar to the 30s. It became so bad that Mushippo temporarily went bankrupt, and its members going on to start Studio Madhouse and Studio Sunrise, with other staff members joining other established animation studios. With these career transitions, there are animators who are still able to go all out with their experimentation. Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata continued to create anime inspired by literature, creating the World Masterpiece Theater in 1969. Shonen started popping up in the 1970s, but leaned more into the gag comedy than it does now, if you can believe that. The Magical Girls series also saw a lot of growth in this decade, after its beginning in the 1960s with Princess Knight, created by Tezuka Osamu. A big reason this genre began growing in the 70s is because the genre to this day touches on topics very important to women. Magical Girls series tend to touch on topics considered taboo, especially back in the 70s, when its population exploded, such as substance abuse and affairs. There was a larger focus on making anime for adults, starting in the 1970s, this decade being the start of boys love anime entering the fray. In the 80s, anime continued to create shows that covered more nuanced topics. Furthermore, with the success of Star Wars in 1977, space opera anime started to become popular. During this time, otaku subculture started really taking off, particularly centering around anime such as Urusei Yatsura and Gundam. Some of these pioneers of culture would go on to create Daikon films, which eventually became Studio Gainax, who had their start making animations for Daikon science fiction conventions. Miyazaki at the time, his newest experimental anime movie, Nausicaa the Valley of the Winds, released in 1984, was so successful that soon after, a lot of investment into more experimental animation was provided. Dragon Ball's success in 1986 inspired the creation of martial arts and wrestling genres. This was also the time when we start to see anime being used as advertisement for video games. The first modern sports anime, Captain Tsubasa, was created in 1983. It was established series, themes, and story structures, which were used by several sports animes that came after. Throughout the 80s, there was also a sort of competition going on, where anime theater movies seemed to aim to outclass the anime films that came before it, via sheer ambition of each film's production, including budget. This avalanche of money came from Japanese economy booming. Between Japan's booming electronics economy and the yen-US dollar exchange rate being so good for the US investors back then. $1 was 250 yen back then, encouraging foreign investors to invest a lot in Japanese companies. Unfortunately, this boom met its crash, and Japan's economy cratered in the 1990s. As an attempt to save the then dying anime industry, the legend himself, Hideaki Anno, wrote and directed Neon Genesis Evangelion, designed to be a critique of otaku culture and mindset, which centered hugely around mechs at the time. It also mixed in imagery from Shinto cosmology, along with elements of Christian and Jewish religions, to flesh out its spiritual elements. Evangelion, also well known for its psychological themes, which seem to derive from Freud and Jung. This anime, indeed, did a lot to resurrect the anime industry. It's well remembered to this day. This criticism that came in the form of anime inspired anime with deeper topics such as Rakusenkon and Gasaraki, mech anime that took on delivering more complex and insightful meaning and plot lines. Though the more basic robot shows, known as super robot shows, did see a temporary revival in the 1990s via remakes of 70s anime. Experimental anime got pushed into late night slots, probably since their ability to drive profit hadn't been proved, in a time where companies didn't have the finances to risk putting these experimental shows in primetime slots. Though anime like Serial Experiments Lain, which found itself in these late night slots, probably were more enjoyable experience watching them at late night. A cool thing to note, though, is that through all of these decades, these anime creators came into animation studios with no clear game plan. They just loved animation or anime they'd already experienced and wanted to make anime to share with the world. They pioneered whole genres of animation and gave them some sense of structure and direction that was built upon by others in the future. As someone who deeply relates with these dreams that these animators held, I'm deeply impressed by this whole cycle of pushing forward animation. The advent of shippable VHS was allowing Western audience to significantly help keep the anime industry alive during the 90s as Japan's economy struggled. Good job, guys. Miyazaki may have introduced disability as a theme in anime with 1997's Princess Mononoke, where he explained at the International Symposium on Leprosy / Hansen's disease history in Tokyo that he was inspired to portray the struggle with people living with leprosy in the movie, as it was, quote, said to be an incurable disease caused by bad karma, unquote. He had visited the Tama Senshoin Sanatorium, a sanatorium for people who had had or have had leprosy. Miyazaki's movies had always had themes encouraging an appreciation of nature and or the human experience at its most fundamental level. These forces came to a head in Princess Mononoke. Although he did well in presenting this clash in an incredibly nuanced way, both humans and nature are just trying to exist and make their environment the most optimal for their survival that they possibly can. Humans do this by advancing their technology further and take nature's resources to prolong their survival, while nature fights to keep nature unchanged, as it's the best environment for the plants and animals inhabiting the forest to survive. Both fight disease the best way they know how. There's no conclusion to this conflict overall, representing the fact that it's an ongoing struggle, and neither side is right or wrong. Neither side is the hero or villain. It's one of, if not the first anime with this kind of nuanced message baked into its central conflict that is also deeply relevant in the real world we live in. Miyazaki is also known to have traveled to many areas with vastly different landscapes throughout Japan to gain inspiration for the settings of his films. Miyazaki, along with Ghibli's animation supervisor Masashi Ando, visited the ancient forests of Yakushima, which served as an inspiration for Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind setting, and the mountains of Shirakami Sanchi for the inspiration of Princess Mononoke's setting. Before Mononoke, Miyazaki directed Porco Rosso, which drew inspiration for the wars in former Yugoslavia, which left Miyazaki with an understanding that mankind will never learn from its past mistakes. This would probably be the first time a foreign war has served as an influencer for an anime. The idea of humanity never learning is theorized to have also been incorporated in Princess Mononoke. Mononoke also inspired a discussion for individualism versus societal conformity, which is hugely important in Japan's social structure to this day. In the 2000s, Takashi Murakami started an art movement which mixed Japanese pop culture with postmodern art. Murakami explained that this is an analysis of post-war Japan through the otaku subculture. Part of the movement was getting rid of high and low art, pushing art to be seen as a continuum. He called it the Superflat movement, which particularly inspired animators who were part of Studio 4C. The 2000s was also the decade where visual novels and eroge began being used often to create anime based off them to help sell whatever game or similarly light novels. Manga had been used to create anime since near the beginning of the history of anime. Shows like Welcome to the NHK continued the criticism of otaku culture, but in a much more straightforward way compared to Evangelion. Anime remakes had also been a thing, but they became more frequent in the 2000s. The 2010s are the decades where isekai took over, And also anime over a decade old that got season 2s or remakes. Heck yeah. Why did the isekai genre become so huge so quickly though? Probably because as technology became more and more integrated in our lives, work and social expectations became more and more draining. Jobs expect you to learn more, be faster. You go home, wind and relax, so socializing becomes harder due to that lack of energy. Technology placates us while we become more lonely. So why not make anime about escaping into a fantasy world where the hero makes a difference in the world? They have the power to change a world versus our current world, where any impact the average person can have can feel so small in such a vast world. This served as an excellent escapism at a perfect time for it, hence its popularity. The internet allowed influencers to inspire their followings to get into anime. Whether this recent increase of Western audiences will impact the anime made in the future is yet to be seen. But since Western audiences have had some influence on the anime production in the past, there will continue to be some impact, it's safe to assume, since Western audiences had such an influence on anime in general in the past. The 2020s in the beginning saw a decrease in anime revenue due to COVID slowing production timelines. Studios were helped by any licensing deal revenues that they still had, but also less TV anime was made because of COVID complicating everything. I might have missed some things. Feel free to point them out or make any other corrections that you can think of in the comments or in the comments down below. Please tell me what you thought and any recommendations you may have for anything. Thank you so much. Sources are in the description. Have a great day. Like and subscribe if you like this. Comment down below any critique you have. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.